That was what Blake threw in my face, in front of the board, in front of our father, while I was still in a wheelchair, barely surviving the crash. If you've ever been told you're pretty enough to be seen but not smart enough to be heard, if you've ever been dismissed, diminished, or boxed in because you dared to outshine the room, you need to stay. Because this story is a reckoning for every person who's ever been underestimated just for daring to be more. The morning sunlight glinted off the sleek facade of Monroe Industries as I stepped out of my car, heels tapping against marble. My assistant scurried beside me, whispering updates I had already memorized at 4 a.m. I didn't need coffee. My adrenaline was brewed from ambition, deadlines, and the crisp thrill of control. Today was the global expansion pitch. I'd refined the strategy for weeks. Late nights, empty takeout containers, and screens full of data projections. The moment I entered the glass boardroom on the top floor, the eyes of a dozen executives lifted with barely concealed expectation. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. The presentation unfolded like choreography. Slides, statistics, foresight, future. I saw heads nod, pens scribbling, even subtle grunts of approval. Except for one pair of eyes that stayed cold and still, my father's. David Monroe sat at the head of the table, legs crossed, hands steepled under his chin. He didn't speak, just nodded once. A transaction of acknowledgement, not pride. Afterward, as we filtered out, Blake brushed past me, his cologne sharp and overconfident. "Don't get too comfortable, sis." He smirked, his tone half joking, half poison. "Markets can turn overnight. Or people." I narrowed my eyes, but said nothing. Blake always had a way of turning success into suspicion. He'd never pulled weight in the company, yet somehow maneuvered into every photo op. Charm without contribution. That evening, dinner at the Monroe estate was as meticulously uncomfortable as ever. Silverware clinked against porcelain as Evelyn asked about the Singapore deal with a warm smile that never reached her eyes. "It's progressing," I said. David barely looked up from his steak. Then Blake leaned back in his chair. "You know, burnout rates in female executives are staggeringly high. Might want to pace yourself, Luna. Wouldn't want the golden child to melt down." The silence was a slap. Evelyn gave a soft laugh, neutral, avoidant. David didn't blink. I looked at Blake, choosing every word like a scalpel. "Some of us burn brighter because we work harder." He raised a glass in mock salute. "Touché." Back in my car, I gripped the wheel harder than usual. The headlights lit up the quiet suburban road as I played through restructuring options in my mind. Maybe cutting underperforming markets first, or adjusting timelines for Brazil. My fingers tapped the steering wheel in rhythm with the possibilities. The radio murmured in the background, unregistered. Then it happened. A blinding flash. Screeching tires. The violent twist of metal and bone. My world fractured in a single heartbeat, scattered across the blacktop. Glass rained like stars before everything went black. I surfaced in waves. Pain crackled through my legs like electric fire. Sterile light, beeping monitors, voices muffled under morphine. My throat scraped as I tried to speak. The nurse leaned in. "Are you awake? Do you remember what happened?" I blinked, heart hammering, and asked the only thing that mattered. "Did we close the Singapore deal?" When you can't walk, people stop looking for you in the eye, especially the ones who once praised you. I sat upright in the rehab bed, spine stiff with effort, a black pen in one hand and a quarterly financial report in the other. My legs, swathed in braces and gauze, pulsed with a deep ache that hadn't dulled since the crash. But pain was a side note. The real injury was watching the world I'd built learn to move on, without me. Flowers lined the windowsill. Their colors had faded, petals drooping like polite smiles overstaying their welcome. The get well soon cards from board members were signed with the same corporate stiffness I used to critique. None of them had visited. None had called twice. "Morning, Ms. Monroe," the nurse chirped, adjusting my IV. "You've got a visitor today." I didn't ask who. I already knew. David Monroe walked in, crisp as a financial audit. He carried a leather briefcase instead of anything remotely comforting. Without greeting, he placed a folder on my tray table. Cue 2 numbers, he said. China's holding. Germany's soft. You should read through. Hi, Dad, I replied, monotone. He didn't sit, just scanned my monitors like they were spreadsheets. You need anything? He asked. Access to the new vendor portal. My login's not working. He didn't look at me when he spoke. We've restructured digital access. Talk to IT. He was gone in under 10 minutes. Later that afternoon, I did speak to IT. Or rather, Rachel Kim, the only manager who ever gave me unfiltered answers. I shouldn't be saying this, but Rachel looked around, then leaned in. Your clearance was revoked last week. Blake approved the new hierarchy himself. Blake. The echo of his name felt heavier now. That night, I searched his name online, almost out of instinct. The press photo stunned me. He stood at a podium, Monroe Industries logo aglow behind him, under the headline, Monroe Industries announces interim strategist amid recovery transition. He wore a navy suit too sharp for someone who used to sleep through budget calls. And he used my words, my frameworks, repackaged into buzzwords and bullet points. He was standing on my bones and calling it innovation. The knock came just before dinner. Evelyn entered with a tray, her smile practiced but her eyes uncertain. David followed, pulling up a chair. Blake came in last, suit jacket draped over his shoulder like he belonged here. We thought we'd bring dinner to you, Evelyn said, setting plates down with fragile cheer. The conversation was superficial at first. Weather, hospital renovations, Blake's new Tesla. Then David cleared his throat, his voice clipped. Luna, effective this quarter, your role at Monroe Industries will be paused. My fork froze midair. Paused? He continued, eyes flat. You've been taken off payroll. Officially, you're on indefinite medical leave. Evelyn interjected quickly. Sweetheart, you should focus on healing. Maybe this is life's way of telling you to slow down. I stared at her, betrayed by the softness in her tone. So you're cutting me off completely? David didn't hesitate. Until you can be useful again. Yes. The silence rang louder than any screaming match. Blake swirled his wine, saying nothing, but his smirk was back, smug and intact. I turned to him, letting my eyes drag across his tailored blazer, the subtle shine of his cufflinks, my old uniform. Keep the seat warm, I muttered. They thought I was broken. That was their first mistake. The mornings still started slow. Stiff hips, creaking knees, the hum of a worn-out heating pad. But pain had shifted from paralyzing to manageable, which was just enough. Enough to let focus back in. Enough to start building. I stared at my laptop screen, cursor blinking over an empty slide deck. My fingers hovered, hesitating only a moment before racing across the keys. Phoenix Tech was a sleeping giant, bloated with outdated systems and stale leadership. But I saw it. A way out. A way forward. A way through. Blake's voice came back to me, that smug tilt in his jaw as he faced the cameras. My sister chose to step back. She realized leadership isn't for everyone. Not for everyone. Just not for me, apparently. I emailed the pitch to James Fletcher, ex-CEO of Phoenix and a legend in his own right. 10 minutes later, he replied, Let's meet. I'm curious. Rachel met me at an outdoor cafe 3 days later, eyes scanning for cameras, even though no one cared about us anymore. She wore a denim jacket and a look of quiet defiance. He told me to kill your access the day after the crash, she said, sipping her iced tea. Didn't even flinch. Did you ask why? He said, leadership requires presence, whatever that means. She looked me in the eye. But I didn't delete your archive folders, just hid them. You still have a digital footprint. For the first time in months, I smiled. In the evenings, I practiced walking again, between parallel bars with a harness, then without. By September, I could climb stairs unaided. By October, I was running 10-minute miles. No one at Monroe Industries knew. I didn't post updates. I didn't go out. I wanted them unaware, unprepared. The meeting with James was in a private office tucked behind a co-working space in Palo Alto. He looked older than I remembered, but his eyes were still sharp. The kind of sharp that sliced through arrogance. "You look better than your brother claimed," he said, gesturing to the seat across from him. "Let me guess. He called me emotionally unstable, too passionate, not scalable. He called you a liability." I laid out the deck. It took 20 minutes to present, 10 more to answer his questions. He interrupted only once, to ask how I'd managed to calculate projected burn rates without internal access. "I still have sources," I said, and let that hang. His fingers tapped the edge of the table. "You really think you can revive Phoenix Tech?" "I think I can make them regret overlooking it." We talked through implementation plans, potential hires, board composition. I mentioned Rachel, and his eyes lit up. He remembered her. Then I floated a wild card. "Alex Harper," I said. James raised a brow. "The former CFO?" "He's consulting now. We crossed paths last week. Let's just say he didn't leave Monroe Industries on good terms." Later that night, I called Alex. His voice was dry but amused. "David still chewing glass for breakfast?" "Probably. Want to help someone break his teeth?" He laughed. "Send me your pitch deck." The next morning, I sat across from James again. The mood had shifted. Something unspoken hung between us. Potential. Maybe even danger. He leaned forward, gaze unwavering. "Why you?" "Because they taught me everything I need to take them down." He didn't blink, just reached into his briefcase, pulled out a folder, and slid it across the table. "You start Monday, but no one can know you're the one in charge." While they asked for magazine covers, I was building the war machine that would bury them. The headlines still featured Blake Monroe, now dubbed Silicon Valley's Rising Heir, by a magazine that never once spelled my name right. He smiled, he waved, he delivered buzzwords with the elegance of a man reading cue cards written in crayon. But behind those glossy spreads, the market told a different story. Monroe Industries was treading water. And Phoenix Tech? Quietly, relentlessly, it surged forward. James had once told me, "The best revenge isn't loud, it's structured." So I made it architectural. Phoenix acquired 2 bleeding-edge startups by mid-2022. One focused on nanobattery optimization, the other on real-time quantum encryption. Neither were sexy enough to dominate headlines, but together, they made our patent library worth twice what it had been last year. I didn't give interviews. I didn't tweet. I showed up to strategy meetings in black suits, took notes, and made decisions that no one could trace back to the name Monroe. In our inner circle, Rachel had fully stepped into her new role. She had a gift for memorizing boardroom agendas and dismantling them before the first coffee break. She managed the shell company network with Alex, who'd become our silent ace. Over 3 quarters, they executed an intricate acquisition plan. 12 shell entities, all legally distinct, buying up Monroe Industries stock on the open market. 15% by December. No alarms, no SEC flags. Just quiet math. Meanwhile, Blake basked in his hollow spotlight. He held a media roundtable in November, part publicity stunt, part smokescreen. I watched from Rachel's laptop as he misquoted operating margins and attributed a sales spike to a campaign Monroe hadn't even launched yet. "He thinks EBITDA is a dating app," Rachel muttered, sipping tea. "He's starting to believe his own echo," I replied. It would have been funny if it hadn't been so inevitable. James kept his coaching light but deliberate. He'd call on Sunday mornings, ask about the supply chain rollout, remind me that emotional detachment was a muscle I'd need to keep training. "You're not here to punish them, Luna," he'd say. "You're here to outlive them." In December, the Monroe board, facing plummeting investor confidence, leaked an internal memo. Blake had approved a software pivot that doubled production costs. Their overseas team was in chaos. David Monroe, once allergic to outside partnerships, was forced to entertain the unthinkable. A formal proposal arrived via encrypted email at 7:42 a.m. from partnerships@monroeindustries.com to sm.phoenix@cyperholdings.com. Subject: strategic collaboration request. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I stared out my office window as the fog lifted from the Santa Clara hills. The silence was potent, earned. Rachel walked in 10 minutes later, tablet in hand, glasses slipping down her nose. Her expression was unreadable at first, then sharpened into something between disbelief and satisfaction. They want to meet the CEO in person. I wore the same color suit I'd worn the day they cut me off. This time, I walked in without limping. The heels struck polished concrete like a metronome counting down. Every click in that hallway was intentional. Rachel walked half a step behind me, tablet in hand, unreadable. The cameras had already started rolling. Our boardroom wasn't just a battlefield. It was a broadcast, lived to a curated set of stakeholders and press contacts. No leaks, just control. Inside, the Monroe delegation waited. David sat at the head of the long mahogany table like a statue chipped at the edges. Evelyn, wrapped in an ivory shawl, flinched as the doors opened. Blake spun his chair halfway, one arm slung cockily over the backrest, until he saw me. Silence fell like a dropped gavel. I didn't speak. I let the image settle. The same navy suit, the same cold gaze, but no wheelchair, no cane, no hesitation, just precision. Rachel cleared her throat. Phoenix Tech, thanks Monroe Industries for your interest in strategic collaboration. Our CEO will now present our terms. The room didn't breathe. I placed the folder on the table and slid it toward David. Phoenix will acquire a 51% controlling stake in Monroe Industries. In exchange, we'll restructure your core divisions, retire your unstable debt, and integrate your failing subsidiaries under Phoenix oversight. Full operational control transfers immediately upon signing. Blake's mouth opened before his brain caught up. This is a hostile takeover. No, I said, voice level. It's a mercy deal, one your board begged for. Evelyn tried. Luna, honey, you said I should slow down. Remember? My eyes never left her. You told me maybe this was life's way of telling me something. Blake stood now. You don't get to walk in here and... I tapped the tablet. The room's screen came alive. A video played. Blake, mid-interview, speaking with a smoothness that reeked of rehearsal. My sister chose to step back. She realized leadership isn't for everyone. Some people just break under pressure. The playback ended. I let the silence hold. Let them sit in the echo of his words. Funny, I said. I was rebuilding this empire while you were busy rehearsing your charm for Forbes. Blake lunged for the tablet. Rachel moved faster. Her hand closed around it before he was halfway across the room. David hadn't spoken. Not until now. His voice cracked as if unused for months. You planned all this. I turned to him. No heat. Just the final nail. Number you did. When you taught me that family is just business. My empire didn't start with mercy, and it won't end in forgiveness. The skyline burned gold behind layers of glass. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows in my new office, no longer a corner of borrowed space or a name buried in proxy filings. This one had my name on the plaque. Luna Monroe, CEO, Phoenix Global Division. Not temporary, not interim, not invisible. Rachel entered quietly, tablet in hand. She didn't speak right away. She didn't need to. The Monroe deal is finalized, she said, finally. All titles revoked. Blake's already deleted his LinkedIn bio. I didn't turn from the window. Any media pushback? A few legacy outlets are questioning the transition, but shareholders are thrilled. Phoenix stock's up 7% since the announcement. And the internal memos? Rachel's lips twitched into a knowing smirk, circulating like wildfire. Most of them can't believe it was you behind Phoenix's rebound all along. I nodded, barely. Validation had lost its flavor months ago. A soft knock interrupted us. Rachel glanced at the door, then back at me. "It's your mother. She said she doesn't want anything. Just 5 minutes." I didn't answer, just gestured. Evelyn walked in slowly, clasping a small clutch like it might shield her. She hadn't aged much, but something in her eyes had cracked. A quiet uncertainty. Regret? Or just the unfamiliar sensation of powerlessness? "Luna," she began, voice careful. "I know things. I know we didn't protect you, and I can't fix that. But I wondered, can we ever be a family again?" I looked at her. She stood there in silence, waiting for something redemptive. I said nothing. Instead, I walked to my desk, picked up the expansion documents for Phoenix's Asia division, and signed. 1 page, 2, then 3. When I looked up, Evelyn was already gone. Rachel stepped forward, hesitant. "Do you want to keep the Monroe family in your contact schedule for holiday events? Or—" "No." I closed the folder and handed it to her. "Remove them. We don't take calls from ghosts." She paused, then nodded. I returned to the window, letting the light catch the edge of the skyline. The future felt like fire. Dangerous, radiant, clean. My calendar pinged. First meeting. Phoenix Asia Expansion CEO briefing. Let's begin. She never needed to slam the door on her way out, because she was the one who now owned the building. As Luna Monroe stood at the helm of Phoenix Global, the skyline behind her no longer represented what she lost, but what she had built. The scars weren't gone. They had simply become part of the architecture. Elegant, silent, and unshakable. Those who once celebrated her rise only to abandon her at her lowest had returned, not in triumph, but in apology. But she no longer needed their approval. Her success wasn't born from revenge, but from clarity. A decision to never again ask for permission to exist. They had taught her how to play their game, and she had rewritten every rule with their own tools. Blake, once flaunting magazine features and recycled slogans, now watched from the sidelines, forgotten in the very empire he thought he'd inherited. David Monroe, who once measured worth in quarterly returns, saw for the first time what he had miscalculated. That legacy isn't passed down. It's claimed. And Luna had claimed it without begging, without shouting, and most importantly, without returning cruelty for cruelty. In her silence, there was a kind of thunder. Not to punish, but to prove. You don't need to destroy others to win. You just need to stop letting them destroy you. What Luna's journey showed was not just a fall and a rise. It was the quiet evolution of a person who stopped performing for love that would never come, and instead learned to honor her own worth in the face of betrayal. She had been cut off not because she failed, but because she succeeded too brightly in a room built for shadows. Justice, she discovered, isn't always a courtroom verdict or a dramatic showdown. Sometimes it's as simple as not letting bitterness make your decisions. It's choosing to build something so strong, the ones who left you behind can't look away, even if they can never come back. To those who've been pushed aside, underestimated, or quietly erased, perhaps the most powerful act of all is not to get even, but to get better. And in doing so, become undeniable. Because no lie lasts forever, and no betrayal goes unseen by time. And as Luna stepped into her next chapter, not as someone's daughter or sister or protege, but as the architect of her own legacy, the lesson remained crystal clear. Sometimes the greatest form of justice is not vengeance, but evolution. If this story struck a chord, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with anyone who's ever been underestimated like you. There are more stories like this waiting for you on the channel. If you're ready to hear the truths they tried to bury, come take a look. You didn't build a life here, Tessa. You were just convenient, until you weren't. Those were my father's words, spoken during my 30th birthday dinner, while I was still holding a $9 vanilla cake that never got its candles lit. No celebration, just an eviction notice dressed up as growth. If you've ever been treated like a convenience, used, drained, then discarded by your own family, stay. Because this story isn't just mine. It speaks for everyone who's ever been pushed out of the very place they once called home. The house looked the same as always. Beige siding, porch light still flickering like it had been for 2 winters. Familiar, and yet I stood at the threshold like a stranger holding a peace offering wrapped in grocery plastic. I pushed the door open. No one came to greet me. From the kitchen, the heavy scent of pot roast wafted out. Mom's special, though it didn't smell like it was made for me. I slipped past the living room, slid the cake behind the fruit bowl on the counter. I didn't want it to be a spectacle. Just a slice, maybe. A nod to 30 years of breathing. Dad sat at the head of the table, reading something on his tablet. His wire-frame glasses caught the light like armor. Mom was already seated, spooning carrots onto a plate. The silence wasn't new, but tonight it held a different shape. Sharp. Heavy. "Dinner's hot," she said, still not looking up. I nodded, took my seat across from them. My chair creaked louder than expected. Dad cleared his throat. We passed the dishes like strangers in a waiting room. I didn't mention the cake. I waited for someone to say happy birthday, or at least acknowledge the date. But the only sound was the knife sawing through roast, like it was cutting something else entirely. Then Dad set his fork down. "We've talked, and we think it's time you found your own place. End of the month." It landed like a punch with no warning. I blinked. "What?" "You're 30, Tessa," he said flatly. "It's overdue." I looked at Mom. She didn't flinch, just stared at her plate like the peas had answers. Her cardigan sleeve brushed the edge of her wine glass as she reached for more carrots. "I've been helping with bills. Groceries. My voice cracked. "I pay more than half of everything here." Dad wiped his mouth with a napkin. "We've been more than generous." I stared at him, heart thudding in my chest. More than generous? The man who made me show my bank app every month just to prove I hadn't spent too much on lattes? The man who let me cover electric, water, car insurance and still told the neighbors I was finding my path? Mom finally spoke. "It's good for you, sweetie. Independence." Independence? From what? My own roof? I nodded slowly, not trusting my mouth to move without screaming. I stood up, carefully lifting my napkin and placing it on the table. My hands were shaking. "Excuse me," I said. My voice sounded foreign. I walked up the stairs, each step a closing door. At the top, I paused, just for a second, then turned left toward my childhood bedroom. The calendar on my door still showed February. I hadn't bothered changing it. Inside, everything looked the same. The fading lilac walls, the bookshelf with books I hadn't opened in years. The air was still. I moved toward the closet. I opened the door and knelt. The panel at the back felt familiar under my fingers. A small groove, invisible unless you knew it was there. I pressed it gently. Click. The panel slid open. Inside were the manila folders. Stacked, labeled, sealed like memories in a vault. 6 years of rent payments, receipts, bank transfers, emails. Every single time I'd covered something for them. The spreadsheet with the totals. The screenshots of texts where they'd promised to pay me back soon. Even copies of their cable bill in my name. They had no idea. The cake was still downstairs, untouched. But the candles, maybe they weren't for wishes this year. Maybe they were for light chat GPT John Noy. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I canceled the utility payments. One click at a time, I made a silent scream. The glow of my laptop cast a cold hue across the room, catching the edges of paper stacks and highlighters like quiet sentinels. The manila folders lay open across my bed, a war map of debts and half-truths. I sat cross-legged in my old hoodie, mouse in hand, spine straight. I wasn't hiding anymore. I was documenting. My fingers hovered above the trackpad. First, the electric bill. Cancel autopay. Confirm. Then the water bill. Remove payment method. Internet next. I didn't even blink when the screen asked, "Are you sure you want to stop service?" Yes, I was very sure. A soft ping vibrated on my phone. Dad, internet down? Mom, weird, the car insurance won't go through. Did you change something? I didn't reply. I stared at their words like artifacts. Detached, almost clinical. I clicked into a spreadsheet I'd started in 2023.